Hi everyone, welcome to my next footwear modeling tutorial. We're working today in Rhino and we're going to do a little bit of Grasshopper. What we're after is modeling a midsole out of a single surface and then applying a geometric pattern to it. Let me give you an example of kind of what we're going for. I've pulled up this Adidas shoe that has this diamond pattern that covers the bottom of this. I'm assuming it's like a rubber cup sole. But the bottom of this outsole, and then also wraps up onto the side. Hopefully you can all see that. So we are going to look at, in Rhino and Grasshopper, how you would mimic this kind of an effect, but then you can go crazy and design whatever of your own patterns that you want to apply. So for starters, we need to go over a couple things about Rhino and surfaces. So I'm not an expert at any of this, but from my time working with Rhino and developing the techniques that I'm going to show you today, I've learned a couple things about surfaces in Rhino. So when Rhino makes a surface, a NURB surface will always have 4 corners, no matter what. So this, here's a 4-cornered, flat, planar NURB surface. And another thing I'm going to point out right now is another thing that surfaces in Rhino always have is a U coordinate and a V coordinate. Basically, it's curves that define the surface in 2 directions. So this one going lengthwise, I actually don't know if it's the U or the V. It's one or the other. But it's like, think of it like X and Y. It's a grid that defines the surface. And so the reason that this matters, or that this is important at all, is because when we go into Grasshopper, so in Rhino we're going to model the surface that we're going to apply the texture to, the surface that's going to be the midsole. But we need to make sure that we think about its UV coordinates while we do that, because Grasshopper is going to take the information about the surface and about the UV coordinates and use that information to apply the pattern to the midsole. So that's the first thing. Every surface has 4 corners, and every surface has a U coordinate and a V coordinate. Hopefully if that's not clear now, hopefully it'll become a little bit more clear later. So how this works in a surface that's not flat in Rhino, if we make a box, here we go. So we have made this wonderful box, and this is not a surface. This is called a polysurface. Polysurface because it's made up of 6 surfaces. So if we select it and we tell Rhino to explode it, you'll see that it becomes 6 surfaces. So this is important because when you're feeding geometry from Rhino into Grasshopper, Grasshopper is really picky about whether it's a surface or a polysurface. So I'm going to pull up Grasshopper and we're going to try to explain a little bit more what I'm talking about. So if you're using Rhino 6, Grasshopper comes standard now. I think it's still technically open source, but I think McNeil has bought it or is working closely with it or something. So it's integrated into the software now, which is nice in a lot of ways, but it's still open source, in that people write new, just people from the community write new, interesting experimental tools for it all the time. So if you haven't worked in Grasshopper before, this might get a little bit disorienting. For all of these tutorials, I'm just going to assume that you have at least a little bit of a background in CAD modeling and maybe have looked at these softwares a little bit. You should be able, just following my clicks, be able to replicate what we're doing here, and hopefully that will serve as a starting point for you to investigate it more yourself, because honestly, even with tutorials, it just takes a lot of personal time spent with the software to wrap your head around how it works. So the first thing we're going to do in Grasshopper here to talk about the differences between poly surfaces and surfaces in Rhino. So we have our poly surface here. Oh, I exploded it accidentally. Control Z. And then we also we'll do another just like flat planar surface next to it. So we have polysurface, surface. So if I come over here, in Grasshopper, a surface is just called a surface. So I'm going to grab this surface parameter. You can also double click and just start typing surface, and it brings up everything that has to do with surfaces in Grasshopper. Excuse me, in Grasshopper. And I'm going to right click on this and say set one surface, and then come over here and tell it which surface to reference. And if I click on just this single NURB surface, you'll see it turns red, and that means that over here Grasshopper is now referencing this piece of Rhino geometry. So it's great, it's happy. It says, okay, this is a surface, we're good. But if I try to change which surface this is referencing, and I try to set it to this poly surface, this cube that we made that's made up of 6 different surfaces, Grasshopper does not like it. It says, nope, it's not a, what's the error message? A reference surface cannot be found in the Rhino document. So I try again, I say, no, it's geometry, add it, reference it here, and it won't do it. So what we need to do to import geometry like this into Grasshopper is instead grab this parameter for a BREP. BREP is, you can kind of see it there, boundary representations, BREP. And that is Grasshopper's way, as best I can tell, of talking about a poly surface in Rhino. So if I set one BREP and select this, now you can see, oh great, now it's happy. It knows, it says, okay, it's this group of 6 surfaces, this poly surface is now imported into Grasshopper. So we'll set this again. So that's the reason why. The reason why I show this is because it's a lot easier in Rhino to model the geometry of a midsole for a shoe by doing it in several different pieces. Maybe model the sidewalls and then model the bottom portion, and then create some kind of transition. And there's some, there's some designs where I'm sure you just want to model it manually in more complex pieces. But for what we're doing, for, you remember this effect that we're going for, it's really important that we make the midsole out of just one surface. It can't be a poly surface like this. It needs to be just one, because the tools that we're going to use in Grasshopper only accept surfaces as inputs. Here's, anyway, we'll get to this. This is actually a good point. I probably should have mentioned this before, but the tools that we're going to be using today do not come standard with Grasshopper. They're free. It just takes a little bit of work to download them. So I'm going to show you where to download them really quick. This website, Food for Rhino, apps for Rhino and Grasshopper, is awesome. I actually don't know if it's run by McNeil, the company, officially. Anyway, I've never had any problems with it, any viruses or anything. It's very safe, is what I'm trying to say. Anyway, if you come here, Food for Rhino, you'll have to create a little login to download stuff, but you're going to search for an app called Lunchbox. And Lunchbox is just this, it's a great set of tools, but it's just kind of this random assortment of tools that apparently allows you to do stuff like this. So you'll need to go to Food for Rhino, download Lunchbox, and then follow the instructions to install this plugin to Grasshopper, which will get you this tab up here that says Lunchbox. So that's sorry, that's a little pause in the workflow. Hopefully it doesn't take you too long to work that out, but that's going to help you as we follow along, because we're going to be using a lot of that today. So hopefully we've covered, up to this point, surfaces, poly surfaces, how to import those into Grasshopper, and then we're going to be using some of these tools from Lunchbox, which you need to download once we get our midsole modeled. So for now, we're going to scoot Grasshopper over here. Need a little more real estate. And we're just going to delete everything we've got. We don't need this anymore. So, how do we make a midsole, out of one surface and to make it out of one surface, you know, midsole is not a rectilinear, straight geometric thing. It's this organic object it's asymmetrical. It has lots of different curves. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start with, there we go, a sphere. So I'm just going to make this sphere in the center. And there we go. We've got a sphere. Now, the interesting thing about spheres in Rhino is you might be thinking, oh, is this a poly surface or is this a surface? This is just one surface. Unlike the square, you can make a perfect sphere out of just one NURB surface in Rhino. So it's still, this is a square surface. It still has 4 corners. Its corners are just gathered at the poles. So I'll try to show you what I mean here. So if we come back over here to Grasshopper and we say surface parameter, set one surface, and now if we hide the geometry over here, great, now we've loaded this into Grasshopper and it's just showing us it in Rhino. Maybe we need a little bit more space for Grasshopper. There we go. So once we have that, we're going to grab one of these paneling tools. Let's just go with quads because it's simple. And we're going to load the surface in there. And it has some U and V numbers already loaded, so it's going to divide it 10 divisions in one direction and 10 divisions in the opposite direction. If we hide that. So now you can kind of see Grasshopper has split this sphere up into panels, and you can see, okay, it's got 2 poles, this sphere does. So it's a flat rectangular surface that's just wrapped up and stretched around itself to make this sphere. This is going to be important because when we, like I was saying earlier, the UV coordinates are how Grasshopper determines how to apply whatever pattern you're wanting to apply to the geometry that you've created in Rhino. So we need to be aware of how the object that we're using has its UV coordinates mapped. Again, hopefully if this is not clear yet, it will become clear a little bit later on. So if we take this and we say, okay, looking at it from an orthographic side view, we can see, let's change this to wireframe. So we can see that all of the poles are gathering right, or the pole of it is right here. So the UV coordinates, the corners of the surface are all going to be gathering right here. And so if we use that portion, that's going to distort the pattern that we are going to apply to this later. So what we're going to do is just take this, look at it top down, and tell Rhino to rotate it. There we go. So now, looking at it from the side, the poles of this sphere are pointing out to the sides. So that's where we want it to be. So for now, we can kind of ignore this stuff. We're going to turn it off so it doesn't clutter us up visually. And we're back to just our sphere in Rhino. So what we're going to do to turn this sphere into a midsole that's made out of a single surface, we're going to go ahead and just chop off most of it. Take a straight line, chop it somewhere, I don't know if this is thirds or quarters, but we're going to use this line to trim the rest of this sphere away, leaving us with this nice little bowl. So now what we're basically going to do is we are going to manipulate this into the shape that we actually want. And to help us with that, I have imported the bottom down view of this Ultra Boost midsole and outsole. This will just, this way this will be our template for what we're kind of going for. So let's actually start by moving things around a little bit. We're going to move this up. Great. And yeah, that'll work just fine. So we'll turn that off for a second, but we will be coming back to that. Oops. Okay. So we've got our bowl now, and now we're going to use, to kind of push and pull and sculpt this into the shape that we need, we're going to use one of my new favorite tools in Rhino. Not that it's new, but it's new to me. Cage Edit. Under Transform, Cage Edit, or you can just type Cage Edit. It'll bring it up. It's going to ask us to select captive objects. That's the object that we want to put in a cage. So we'll select this one, and it's going to ask us what kind of object we want to use to transform this. So basically what this is doing is it's taking our surface, and it is linking our surface to another type of geometry, like a bounding box, a box that goes around the surface, a line that we could draw anywhere and use that as the control object to deform this surface or transform this surface, a rectangle or a box. We're going to do bounding box because we just want, I mean, it's kind of hard to explain, but you'll see in just a second. We're going to say bounding box. Coordinate system just means, how is the box going to be oriented? We're fine with it being oriented to the world, which is, just the modeling environment that we're in. So we'll say, okay. And now it's going to ask us about how many control points we want on the cage. And again, if you haven't seen this before, it's kind of hard to explain, so I'll just show you. This is the setup that I found to be most useful for this process that I've developed. X point count 4, Y point count 5, and Z point count 4 with a degree of 3 for each. So we press enter 2 more times, and we get this cage. So the cage, now this rectangle with these control points now control how this surface deforms. So if I grab one of these and yank on it, you can see it's kind of subtle, but it's undergone a little bit of a deformation there. I've pulled, and if I pull it the other way and I push, again, it's undergone some kind of a deformation. So now it's like a puppet on strings, right? We have complete control over how to push and pull this surface so that we can make it into whatever we want. And you'll notice there, as I did that, the UV coordinates that you can see there, the grid, got way more complex. So that's just something to be aware of is, in all CAD modeling, the simpler something is, the better. And so we're just going to be aware of the number and types of deformations that we're doing to this so that we don't overload the software with a surface that has, 1,000 U divisions and 1,000 V divisions, because that's going to get really slow and laggy and isn't going to be as clean and precise as having a fewer number of UV coordinates. So hopefully I've explained that well. And now I'm just going to take you through, this is how I sculpt it, this is how I mold it. I'm going to start from this side view. And, if you look at a shoe, from any of the orthographic views, top, or not top, but like from the lateral or the medial side or front or back, this nice gentle curve is not how a midsole meets the ground usually. So we're going to grab this set of control points. So this is this whole layer, and we're going to drag them down to hang out with these ones. So that's started to deform this down so it's not such a gradual transition. And we're going to do the same thing with this other tier, drag it all the way down. So, hopefully you can kind of get a feel that we're just taking this and kind of shaping it by dragging these points around. So we've drug everything down now to change the transition from vertical to horizontal. Hopefully I don't make too many mistakes while I'm doing this. I really only figured out the system that I was satisfied with just like yesterday or the day before. So I've been practicing so I can show it to you guys. So we've got this sort of bowl shape, but it's still not, if we go back to this shoe that we've been referencing, this is a pretty abrupt transition. It has a nice little gentle roll to it, but it comes down and over. It's for us to be able to walk on it, we need it to be right under our foot. We can't have this really rolling, gentle slope. So we're going to select all of these bottom control points. So this is, these are all the ones that we've dragged down. And this was the part that that I accidentally discovered that really made this possible. Is for these you can use scale. Scale is a set of commands in Rhino that allows you to just change how big things are. But when you use it on objects, or when you use it on points like these control points, it just changes their location. So scale is going to allow us to select a group of control points and then really easily move all of them uniformly. And the uniformly part is important because, we're not like kids in a sculpting class making something out of clay. Like this needs to be logical and mathematical and really have nice, smooth, controlled surfaces. So what we're going to do is we're just going to type in scale once we've selected these control points. Press enter to get so now it's just placed it. This is the calculated center of all of these. And we are just going to scale them, expand them out in all directions to give us this transition. So I went a little too far that time. So we'll just redo that. And as we drag it out, do a little bit more. We're going to start to get something much closer to what we want for the transition from the sidewall of the midsole to the bottom of it. So it's probably good for now. So we take a look now. We've got this nice little bowl. Looks like something you could throw your keys and wallet in at the end of the day. Anyway, and it's kind of cool. You can see, start to see the relationship between this box that we put around it with control points and what it's doing to the surface. So now we're going to go to a top-down view. Now that we have those two steps completed, we'll turn on our little template here, this boost, and we're going to start grabbing groups of these and dragging them around to get the shape that we want. So I think of these as in sets. So there's like these, I think this is what, like 16? These 16 control points, remember there's a bunch of control points down here, are one set. And these ones are the next set, etc. So we're going to be working with them not as individual points, but kind of in sets. So we're going to select all these and just drag these out here because a shoe is not circular. It is oblongish. We're going to grab these and pull these all up here. And it's not shaped like a canoe either. So we're going to grab these. And from this point out, I'm just going to sculpt kind of a generic midsole, but it's really, now as the designer, it's up to you. How do you, what do you want to get out of this surface? What form do you want the midsole to have? And, so now you're going to have to make some design choices. But I'm going to, finish the process just to show you kind of how I get the shape that I'm going for, and then you can adapt this. And that's the fun thing about this cage edit tool is, it's kind of infinitely editable. You can keep fiddling with it until you get what you want. So I've got these here, and if I'm quiet for a little bit, it's just because I'm trying to model it, and maybe you're tired of listening to me talk. But anyway, we're going to keep on using, to keep things uniform, we're going to keep on using the scale tool, and we'll turn this on now. Maybe we'll go wireframe. Yeah, we can still kind of see things. Actually, no, we'll stay that way. So we can see in this direction we need to go a little further. Great. This direction we need to go a little further. Great. And we need to pull these in the middle. So we're going to grab all these and select scale 1D, scale in just one dimension, because we don't, if we do just scale, and then we pull all these points in, it's going to pull them in from every direction. And then, part of our midsole is not going to be in ground contact, and that's a problem. So instead, we're going to do scale in one direction, scale 1D, or one dimension. Same thing, except now we're just pulling these in from this top view, and everything on the bottom, on the side here, you know, stays in contact with the ground. So great, we've pulled those in. We're going to move these down a little bit. Okay, so we're just going to continue sculpting this. I'm trying to get it close to our reference here, using mostly scale 1D to stretch this. Oh, we don't want to select the picture. Let's lock that. There we go, getting a little closer. Now, what has worked well for me is, you know, always thinking of them in groups or subgroups, because otherwise it can get really messy and really easy to kind of forget where you're at. Okay, so we've got that pretty close. Again, you know, if this is a project that you actually care about, you know, without that reference image, though, it's looking a little weird to me. But yeah, you can take as much time or as little time as you want sculpting this. And again, the nice thing about this is you can see our UV coordinates are all, they've been moved around a little bit, but they're all still pretty evenly spaced, nicely spaced. And I'm feeling good about that. Anyway, I feel like we're mostly good there. We're still a little... No, these are still not quite where I want them to be, especially this kind of front edge. But if we do that, we start getting too much pinching over there. Trying to remember how I resolved this last time. Maybe if we just move this group over, does that give us a little bit of a change? Push a lot of those forward. Okay, I'm feeling mostly okay about that. And again, you know, this is where you as the designer is really going to come in, just in terms of how you want to shape this. So we've got kind of this, I'm pretty happy with this side profile, pretty happy with the top profile. You know, I could always use more work, but for the sake of this tutorial, we're going to start grabbing some of these top groups and front groups and pulling them around to get the final side profile that we want. So that's feeling mostly okay about that. Maybe we'll just take everything and make it just a little bit taller. Anyway, we can keep messing with it. Some good ways if you're trying to evaluate the shape of your surface, you know, if you're really getting the form that you want, I'll often use rendered, viewport, and Rhino. So that's looking pretty good. You can also use zebra. So you can see we've got this nice, beautiful, regular change in our lines. Everything's looking smooth. There's no weird places. So this is, you know, I've been working on this. It sounds a little pathetic, but I've been working on this for like 6 months. And I really feel like this is the best way I've been able to find yet to get this single surface really nice and smooth midsole. And you could, you know, you could make a cup sole out of this, or, you know, any other kind of, this is more like a runner or athletic silhouette. Anyway, so that's great. We've got that now. And now we're going to bring Grasshopper more into play. If you've made it this far, I think we're, you know, over half an hour in, so congratulations. Stop and have a snack or take a nap if you need to. So let's see. We'll find zebra and turn that off. There we go. That's not what I needed. Make sure we've got Grasshopper back. Okay, so we're going to get ourselves a new surface. We're going to get ourselves a new surface and say set one surface, and Grasshopper is going to be really happy because this is all one surface. And that's, you know, that's why we've gone through all this trouble. Now the fun starts, and because we've put in all the work to make this midsole form out of just one surface, we are totally set to go with Grasshopper. So we're actually going to come in here. We don't need our cage anymore. I mean, you can keep it around if you want to edit it more. But for now, I'm feeling pretty good. So we're just going to get rid of that and actually hide that. And now we have imported into Grasshopper our beautiful midsole. So if you've downloaded Lunchbox, So the tools that we're going to use in Lunchbox, there are ways to do this with, I guess, kind of stock Grasshopper, but it is really hard and messy, and maybe at some point I'll do a video going over it, but you're going to save yourself so much time and frustration if you just download Lunchbox and add it to Grasshopper. So it's got two different types of tools. This is the one I use the most often. It gives you the option to panel a surface with a number of different kind of primary shapes. And honestly, like this, for me, this has covered most of the stuff I've wanted to do. You know, again, I said there are ways that if you want to do some kind of crazy, weird pattern that you've created, like on your own, like you've created a flat drawing of a pattern or something, like you can get there where you can use Grasshopper to wrap it around. But maybe it's just my taste as a designer. I usually tend to go just with more kind of simple geometric things, like I think they've done that pretty nicely on this shoe that we've been using as a reference. So quads. Let's do, I like hexagons. Who doesn't like hexagons, right? So we're going to grab hexagons, the hex paneling tool, and we're going to plug our surface into the surface node. And as you can see, that has given us our hexagons wrapped around our form. Now you might be wondering, what's up with these little things? Remember how we were talking about how each surface in Rhino has 4 corners? Well, in the surface that we made, it does have 4 corners, but this is called a trimmed surface. So that means that we have, if you'll remember when we started, that looks so weird. Oh, okay. So if you'll remember when we started, we used a circle and we just chopped off the bottom little section of that circle. So the rest of that still exists, even though we've trimmed it off. Like Rhino is still storing the information about that surface. It's just not showing it to us right now. So when we put our surface into Grasshopper and tell Grasshopper to put these hexagonal cells all over our surface, then Grasshopper is saying, okay, your surface that has a corner here, a corner here, a corner here, and a corner here. And, you know, they're in weird places because we did a lot of pushing and pulling and bending to get this shape out of a circle. For example, let's see if we can do this. If we say untrim a surface and we select this edge, there we go. Now you can see that is the surface that we've created, the NURB surface with UV coordinates and 4 corners. And all we've done is, at the beginning, we added, we've just added this line to trim it during our process. So that's why, now it's confused, this surface. So that's why you've got those. And the great thing is you can just kind of ignore those for now. They're not really all that important. Okay. Okay, so we've got excuse me. So we've got our hexagons now. And we're going to come back over here to Grasshopper because we don't want these big ones, and they're kind of funny shaped. So we're going to change that. Double click, type in a number. I usually just go with 100. And that gives you this slider. We can duplicate that, and we're going to use that to plug into the hexagonal cell component. And it's going to tell us, or we're going to tell it, how many cells we want it to have. So now you can see it's got like 1,000 little hexagons, but we don't want that many. Try something more like 400. Is that 20 times 20? I think so. Okay, so that's maybe more the size we want. Maybe even a little smaller. Again, it all depends what you as the designer want. And this this little number here is just going to control the shape of our hexagons. Which are still weirdly shaped. So this is where it gets interesting. Can get a little frustrating depending on kind of what you want. So Grasshopper is great in a lot of ways, and in a lot of ways it's kind of plug and play, where you can just say, great, okay, now we've you know, we have our surface, we plug it in here, we tell it how many times to divide something, and it does the job just fine. And it does, except like a lot of these, the shape of these, you see how they kind of shift here in the middle from, I guess, kind of more regular hexagons to these ones that have been stretched a little bit. That is because of our UV grid from the surface that we made. So if you're having problems with that, I don't really mind. I think this looks, you know, I think the transition looks kind of cool. It doesn't really bother me. Again, I'm not designing a shoe, I'm just making a tutorial. Some of these up here stretch a little bit. So if any of those bother you, here's some tips and tricks to kind of try to combat, maybe to reformat your UV grid and get a more regular layout of the pattern on your midsole. So the first thing we'll do is we'll check this and say shrink trimmed surface. And what that is going to do, is it going to do anything? Let's see. Oh, surface is already shrunk. So, okay, so that's not going to help us. Shrink trim surface just means that that when you cut away part of a surface, you can tell Rhino to reconstitute the remaining surface to be as small as possible. That probably doesn't really make sense right now. That's fine, because it's not really going to make a difference. The other thing you can do, if we're going to go ahead, we'll make a copy of this. We could tell Rhino to rebuild the surface UV coordinates. Rebuild surface UV. And when we do that, we are going to get, do we get a dialog box? Apparently not. So we just get this command line up here, and it's going to give us the option to say, oh, in which direction do you want to rebuild the UV, and how many do you want to have? So we can go ahead and say, let's cut that in half. Let's only have half that many UV coordinates in that direction, in the V direction. What type do you want to have? Uniform? Sure. Uniform sounds good. And we say yes, and now it has kept our surface, but it has rebuilt it a little bit more cleanly. So you can use that command to keep rebuilding the UV of a surface until you're happy with it. So, you know, maybe it's a little hard to preview to see what it's going to look like, but I think it's the black lines, maybe. So that'll allow us to get a more regular UV grid. So if we come over here and import a new surface into Grasshopper, and then use that one instead, well, I'll use both of them. So you can see this one that we rebuilt, it did change the layout of the hexagons a little bit. So a lot of the thing is that the stuff I'm showing you today will get you most of the way there. Oh yeah, see, we'd have to figure out something. I don't like the way those are stretching on the back of this one though. You know, so this will get you most of the way there, but it's still going to take just like a lot of experimentation, a lot of fiddling around on your part. That's the fun part of the design. You get to mess with stuff until it's right. And once I'll just kind of try to take you through, I guess, the rest of the process of what I might do for one of these. Actually, I kind of like that other one. We're going to hide this one. So I guess the rest of the process from here on out, I really should do another tutorial on this. But when I'm putting pattern, when I'm doing these kinds of repeating patterns that I want to wrap around a surface, excuse me, then I'll usually go on and do something like this. I'll say scale all of these. And this is the great part about Grasshopper, and especially in combination with Rhino, because Rhino's not parametric, so you'd have to, if I wanted to go in and shrink every one of these hexagons, I would have to go in and do that individually. It'd be like 12,000 mouse clicks or something. But with Grasshopper, I can go ahead and just say, okay, take the cells, scale that geometry, and then it makes a little version of it. But I say no. Scale each of those pieces of geometry around their centers, which are provided by this. And now if we hide that, and we hide that, now we have little hexagons, which may be, we can set how much they scale. And this is the fun part of Grasshopper, just being able to see in real time these complex changes. So we'll pick something that looks good. And we'll say just pull the closest curves onto this surface. Hope it doesn't break the computer. Might take it a second. Oh, that was easy. Oh, except it totally did it weird. Anyway, again, lots of fiddling. Sometimes it works out well, sometimes it doesn't. But in the end, what you're going to get, if we bake these, delete some of these. We've got this pattern that is wrapped around the shape of our... Oh, that's why. Okay, gotcha. So let me try the conclusion of this tutorial again. We're going to get rid of this one, where we rebuild the UV, and we're going to say that's why it didn't work. Grasshopper is a lot of troubleshooting. You say, wait, why did that not work? And then you have to trace your way back through your wires and make sure you didn't literally get any wires crossed. So now, there we go. And now we'll say pull all of these curves onto this surface. And now it should take it a second to figure it out. So yeah, while we're waiting for that to figure itself out, thanks for sticking with this whole long tutorial. Hopefully it's been helpful to you. If you are a professional footwear designer, I am not. If I'm doing something horribly wrong, please tell me. I'd love to learn more about the process, so feel free to correct me in the comments if you feel like I'm doing something wrong in terms of my modeling, or if you have questions, definitely leave them in the YouTube comments, or better yet, you can find me on Instagram at SamWittDesign, Sam_Witt_design. DM me there or comment on something there if you're having problems or questions. I'm really more than happy to help. Okay, this got us a little closer. We're still going to have some random. There's usually some post processing that you have to do. with Grasshopper. But if we just delete these few rogue curves, we now have, look at that. Good job, everybody. Oh, there's some more back here. So yeah, hopefully that wasn't too long. Hopefully you're able to follow along with most of it. It made sense. Like I was just saying, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. If you have any suggestions, I'm happy to learn. So hope you all have a great day, and look forward to, you know, if you use this and do something cool, hopefully you post it and I can follow you and see it and be part of the community. So have a great day, everybody. Till next time.